People of Reddit, what is the worst thing a therapist, psychiatrist, or mental health professional has ever said to you? You'll never do an important job like doctor, veterinarian, firefighter, lawyer, counselor. You'll probably end up in a Walmart for your whole life. I was 8 years old and still remember how mad my parents were, lol. I know a dentist who became a dentist out of spite after a conversation like this with a career guidance guy in high school. You're taking up someone else's space, and they're probably dealing with worse. Veterans mental health recovery program when I was suicidal and reaching out. I was having panic attacks daily and the med he gave me made my anxiety worse. Turned out I just have bad reactions to SSRIs and that was all. He kept trying like a moron. Anyway, I'm in his office and he seems to be taking it personally that all the SSRIs he has put me on are giving me seriously bad side effects. Have you just given up? Then the sucker asks, do you just want to be like this the rest of your life? Obviously freaking not. That is why I'm in this office trying new medications. I was so angry and yet also having a panic attack at the same time. I ended up just walking out and finding a new psychiatrist later. Frick that guy. Sounds arrogant as heck. Can't even accept that the issue could be with his own ability as a physician or his own approach to treatment. My mom went to a therapist during my parents' divorce and he tried to coerce her into having sex with him while she was crying. She stopped crying and left immediately. Do you have suicidal thoughts? Me, yes. Do you have a plan for killing yourself? Me, yes. Do you feel you're a danger to yourself or will harm yourself before your next appointment? Me, yes. Great. I'll double your Prozac. See you next week. I was a nurse. I know if a patient says those sort of things it's an instant 24-hour keep in the hospital or admission for monitoring. And I wasn't joking. I meant it 100%. I never went back. Events happened that kept me from following through instantly with my plan, but I'll never forgive that bastard. I left the office thinking, welp, even a dude that's paid to care whether I live or die doesn't care. That seals the deal. You're very strong to have overcome that. I'm really glad you didn't do it and hope you're in a better place. A couple of years ago, my partner was trying to find a therapist. In the first few appointments, this woman told her that if she didn't start doing certain things, I'd burn out and leave her. I'd never spoken to this woman in my life and she knew nothing about me. My girlfriend never went back after she struggled for a few weeks thinking it might be true before telling me what she said. That makes me so sad. Initially because your girlfriend had to handle that fear and secondly because that was most likely that therapist's own experience. Good for you for being a steadfast partner. I use my creativity with art and craft as both a coping skill and as something that gives me extra purpose in life. A psychologist told me that doing so is maladaptive. I didn't go back. Can't remember the exact wording, but essentially that me being sexually assaulted by a friend and abused by an ex was invalid because I was a man and that really fricked me up for a while. Made me afraid of getting psychiatric or therapeutic help again for a while until things got really bad. I went back, saw a better therapist at a different clinic and she actually talked to me about how horrible that person was. It was really helpful. This whole men can't be raped bulls needs to get thrown out the window. It's all about equality until it has anything to do with a man seeing benefits from it. So, this isn't as bad as the other replies I've read, but here's mine. When I was 11 I started feeling a lot of anxiety and fear about going to school, church, basically any place with a lot of people. My brother had been getting therapy for a while so my parents set me up with a counselor at the same facility. The only session I went to started normally enough. We talked a bit to help me get comfortable. I described what I was experiencing. Normal first season stuff. The counselor then asked me to close my eyes and imagine a situation where I felt anxious. And when I did so instructed me to find Jesus there and go to him. Now, I grew up in a religious family, and here nearly 20 years later I still believe, but that was not what I was expecting out of an alleged medical professional. Long story short, we did that and nothing else repeatedly for the rest of the hour-long session, aka eternity for an anxious, uncomfortable child. I left with the impression that therapy was balls, and I didn't seek out any mental health care until I was in my 20s. Turns out I've got depression, anxiety issues and they respond pretty well to medication. If I had had help from a young age I might have been able to develop coping skills. Instead I flunked out of college twice and developed an addiction to alcohol. Oh well, live and learn I guess. TL. DR. Counselor tells young me to find Jesus, so I decide to just live with mental illness most of my life. It doesn't matter if your intentions are good or not, you shouldn't try to force your religion on someone whether or not they are religious. People like this really annoy me. They either use their work to force their religion or their religion to enforce their opinion. Hope you found better mental aid and don't have to deal with someone like that again. I went to see a psychiatrist because I was having symptoms of PTSD after an abusive ex tried to kill me when I left him, then stalked me, forced his way into my apartment and raped me. The psychiatrist, an older man, told me that I needed to work on my physical appearance and demeanor to be more feminine and demure, because quality men weren't attracted to women who looked and behaved like me, and if I ever tried to get involved in another relationship without making myself more appealing to quality men first, I'd end up right back in the same situation. For this it's important to know that I live in Germany. I saw a psychologist once who treats and diagnoses adults with Asperger's. I was there for my second diagnostic interview, and my mother was with me to be interviewed as well. She told the doctor about my sensory issues, especially with noise, because I would occasionally scream and punch walls and throw stuff around if I was too overloaded with a sound. The psychologist just said something along the lines of, well, 100 years ago people like this would have been treated rather differently around here. And laughed in our faces. Even if he wasn't talking about the National Socialist euthanasia, which took place not quite 100 years ago, I still felt incredibly disgusted and angry. The entire interview with him was a disaster, but this was clearly the worst thing he did. TL. DR. Cheap parents hired a therapist they knew would give them info. I got suspicious and confirmation after I told a ridiculous lie, and my parents sat me down to talk about it when I had never told them anything. Since it was a lie, it took years to trust any adult after that, of which I still struggle with as a 34-year-old. In high school I was pretty difficult because of some real intense crap happening in my life. I wasn't on drugs or violent or flunking out. However, I had a super rough family home life as well as some sexual assault stuff, and I withdrew because of it. My parents were very Sunday Christian, meaning while at church they're the best Christians, but the teachings did not make it home. They still don't understand why only one of their 6 kids talk to them etc kinda thing. Anyway, they gave us no privacy ever, always in our phones, our bags, our rooms, just in every aspect of our life if it offered them control, and I knew it would be no different when they found me a counselor, and you know her. Guys, they sent me to therapy with the pastor's wife. It became super clear she was telling them things immediately, but I held out hope until I couldn't anymore, because I didn't have proof really. I ended up telling her I got an offender bender, but there was no damage, so it was all good. Well, she told my parents right when I left, I guess because when I showed up home my dad demanded to see my bumpers. They won't admit what happened to this day, but they never made me go again. So there's that, at least. Also, I guess this turned out mostly about my parents, but frick them and that counselor too. Had a therapist tell me that my soul, long before I was born, chose my parents and subsequent childhood abuse so that I could learn from it. By this logic, of course, the abused person is always in control and the abuser is helpless. Argue with that logic. Needless to say, I never saw her again. I actually used that idea to cope for a while before realizing it's batshit crazy. I'm not even religious, I just wanted to cling to something that would make the trauma mean something positive. I took a psych test, and when we were going over the results the psychologist implied that all my mental health issues were due to being too sensitive and therefore my fault. I remember feeling broken for like a week afterwards, just crying when I was alone. That same guy wrote in my psych report that I was lying on my test, when I had previously told him I self-report very poorly. If I met this dude in a dark alley tomorrow I'd probably break his self-important nose. Jesus, that's horrible. I'm sorry, that guy sounds like a monster. That's called solitary confinement. I'm calling the police right now. My family's counselor, when she discovered my elementary school was locking up myself and several other students in tiny closets every day. When I was younger, my sister and mom weren't getting along and mom decided we'd see a family counselor. Most of my time with the counselor was easygoing, happy, and short as I had nothing to do with my sister and mother arguing and screaming at each other all the time. That was until she asked me how school was going and started digging into what my daily life was like. In 5th grade, I was caught trying to out one of my female teachers for verbally abusing students and cursing at us too. She used to get a rise out of berating one particularly sweet and timid girl in the class. Well, the teacher caught me recording her cursing and sent me to detention for the rest of the year. Detention equals 3 small rooms behind the principal's office, with room for just 1 student in each closet-sized cell. They would lock us in and the only time as we were allowed out was for lunch or to join other classes for wall sits in the middle of Arizona summers. We had to knock and ask to use the restroom, which was located in the principal's office area too, so no chance to see other students. Usually, one of the small rooms, as we called them, was occupied by a mentally handicapped student who would scream and bang his head on the wall. Poor kid had no clue why they were locking him in a tiny room. Oh, and if any of us were really bad, they'd turn the lights off on us until whoever was acting up would shut up. This usually made the screaming guy go berserk until he hyperventilated, passed out. Countless days spent plugging my ears and choking back tears. I eventually gouged out a small hole under the desk, which was permanently attached to the walls. I disassembled pens and would wrap a note around the ink cartridge, then pass the note and pen through the wall to whoever was on the other side. This lasted for a large part of that grade, but they eventually found the pen hole and punished all of us with more wall sits in the sun while watching everyone else play at recess. I don't know who these people were running the elementary school, but this stuff changed my perception of the world quickly. I thought I could trust anyone with authority, but after this, I pretty much laugh at anyone that thinks they have some sort of power, authority, or seniority over another human being. 14. Telling my shrink about how I was bullied in school. Do they make fun of your nose? No, and that's how I found out I have a big nose. Wow, that person is stupid. Not me, but my late father, and I am still pissed off. My brother, his only son, had a nervous breakdown after our mother died. He was good, through and through. It was like losing 2 people at once. My father believed, sadly, that my brother would find his way home, but he never lived to see him again. We know he's alive out there. Now, I worked in a funeral home that assisted the coroner's office. If someone passes away, they can take the fingerprints to identify them. Bottom line is, there are many ways that they can identify a deceased person. My father was a trucker, blue collar kinda guy. When he lost his leg, he lost his ability to work and he hated it. I am convinced he would have preferred to die in his truck, a provider, but he was a good father and loved his children. The therapist asked why he was depressed and he said he misses his son. She said, "You know, there's a good chance he's been dead for a while, yet you've continued to live." He was quiet when we got into the car and I knew something was wrong. Finally he told me. I called the therapist and asked her where the frick she got off putting that idea in his head. The man had lost enough. He refused further counseling. Who could blame him? Stress is good for you, said to me when I explained I was so stressed out that I broke down every single day during math class and was having consistent breakdowns and feeling extremely burned out. I was 17. Recently homeless because my parents kicked me out for being bi and dating a girl. She was incredibly abusive. She also once killed a neighbor's dog by feeding it cut up razor shards, and as a result I was deeply depressed and anxious. I saw the therapist at my college and was told that women aren't abusers with a real snooty attitude. When I countered with examples, she scoffed and said it must not be that bad if I didn't just leave, and then asked for my payment. I was young and scared and had no support net, and in hindsight was trying to find someone to help me mentally steel myself to leave. Instead, the therapist made me feel invalidated and weak and stupid, and as a result I stayed in a relationship that only got worse and more dangerous. I stayed for 5 more years, eventually figured it out, but she did so much harm. I wish I had that time back. I remember reading this one study on domestic abuse. Female same-sex couples statistically have more cases of domestic abuse than opposite-sex couples. Gay dudes are the least likely to experience domestic abuse. I really need to find links to that study because no one ever believes me. I had a psychiatrist who was convinced I was anorexic even though I wasn't. It really sucked because my therapist and my psychiatrist worked at the same company and they had a policy where they don't help people with eating disorders. So even though I went to a specialist and they confirmed I didn't have an eating disorder, I was still banned from that facility and lost my long-term therapist. Had a policy where they don't help people with eating disorders. Why? Told her how the pandemic has depleted my clientele and she said just get a new job. Like, have you noticed what's going on? I was dealing with a lot of family issues at the time and my ex had just broken up with me that week, so I was taking it fairly hard. My therapist said it's because they found someone better, and when I said no and tried to explain, she just dug in deeper that my ex had dumped me because they found someone better than me. Okay, this is actually my mum's story but it's relevant. 1980s in the UK. My mum is pregnant with me and my dad is, well, not a good person. My dad called my mum when she was out asking her to come home. Mum thought he sounded odd so asked a friend to come with her. Daddy dearest is drunk, which has brought out all of his angry, violent tendencies, and he fires a gun that God knows where he got it at my mum. Missed, thankfully. Police are called. A standoff happens and it's hours before he's finally taken down. The psychiatrist who treats him after tells my mum, who was bracing herself for a good old-fashioned divorce, not to leave him as he wouldn't cope. Frick, that noise. Unfortunately, they did succeed in guilting mum into staying, but she got out a few years later and gave me the best childhood. She passed a few years ago now, but dang, she was awesome. I was fresh out of high school and really depressed. No friends. Horrible relationship with my mom and stepdad. No one to confide in. I gave in after being pressured to see someone because mental health issues run in my family. I booked an hour assessment. I was in and out within 20 minutes. Dude completely dismissed me because I was young, and every young person goes through these things. Everyone worries about their future. This is totally normal. Took me 3 years to go back and was admitted after my second appointment. When they say things like, okay, I understand how you are feeling, thank you for telling me, but proceeds to ignore most of the things I've said. Nothing. She fell asleep in her chair while writing notes. I was talking about the death of my parents. I was 16. Never went to another therapist. You make good eye contact and you're an engaging, interesting conversationalist. Clearly you can't have ADHD. My other patients are addicts with no direction in life. You think your problems are as bad as theirs? This guy was an ADHD specialist I was seeing to try and make sense of my crippling executive dysfunction and lifelong problems with attentiveness. He just spent hour sessions telling me my problems weren't bad enough because apparently everyone with an attention disorder is a fuck-up delinquent. Also, way to throw your other patients, who are surely coming to you to deal with their own demons, under the bus, dude. I told my one and only therapist that I felt like I didn't have a personality and that it seemed like I changed myself depending on who I was around. He asked me what remains constant. I tell him it's my passion for things, especially fiction but also just subjects I find interesting, that I'm good at looking up everything about it and retaining 90% of what I read. He laughed at me and told me that didn't make me special. That was just helpful for trivia night. On a more serious note, when one of my friends went to a therapist and told her they didn't feel worthy of being alive, the therapist said, if you don't want to be alive, just kill yourself then. There's no point in staying alive if you don't want to be. Baffles me beyond belief, even if this particular therapist was still in training. If you don't want to be alive, just kill yourself then. Pretty sure that's illegal to say in most countries. When I was in my early 20s, I was still a virgin at the time and it was really upsetting me. A therapist told me it was a good thing and then showed me pictures of STDs. She told me that STDs were God's punishment for immoral behavior and 1 in 3 people had one. I told her they were probably irresponsible people that didn't use condoms, and she told me that condoms couldn't protect me from God's anger. She then prayed I remained a virgin until marriage and that I would no longer desire to commit the sin of premarital sex. Looking back, I should have reported her to some sort of therapist license board. Also, I've had plenty of sex since about a year after that and still no STDs. I guess God isn't angry enough at me. TW. Sexual assault. I was getting therapy for depression and bipolar disorder. The night before one of my sessions, I was raped by a friend of mine. It was awful, and I really needed to talk to someone about it. So when I got to therapy, I was primed to just completely open up and get some real help. Instead, my therapist asked me if I liked it. Frick that therapist. Well, you have a lot going there, followed by an awkward silence and nothing helpful. It was my first time ever opening up on that level. At that time, I moved from Birdsk, a small city in the region, to Novosibirsk. In the new school, preventive conversations were held with a psychologist. All the children told about their dreams, hobbies and shared their views on life. I said that I love rock and would like to spend my youth traveling or working. Apparently, the psychologist was not impressed. In front of the whole class, she said, "Are you from Birdsk? That explains why you're so weird. Everything in your city is not of this world." Interpretation of an offensive phrase in Russian, hinting that you are crazy. So, I had my first episode with psychosis when I was about 13, but I recovered and didn't need care or medicine. The second time it happened I was 16 and it was much worse. I saw a psychiatrist at my local health department. My parents had no money, so this was all we could afford. This doctor specialized in mental health for teenagers. He even had an article in the local paper once a week. I had always been overweight and I always aspired to be an actor. Well, in less than an hour he completely took all my confidence and dreams away. I looked up to and trusted my elders, so I thought this man knew what he was talking about, not to mention that I was extremely vulnerable. He said, "You know, most actors and actresses are slim and attractive." Then he said, "Are you ordinary or extraordinary?" He even drew it on a piece of paper and circled extra. "Most people are just ordinary, not special. It's okay to just be one of those people." I never really got over that L. Like I said, I was 16 then. I'm 43 now. I figured if I can't handle my senior year of high school and I had a nervous breakdown, how could I ever handle Hollywood or New York? A doctor's responsibility is to help their patients heal. This guy cut a wound in me so deep it still hasn't healed. I'm sure he said more fricked up crap to me in that session, but I don't remember because of those two things. TLDR. Shrink told me at 16 I was too fat and ordinary to be an actor. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I went to see a counselor who was supposed to help me deal with being repeatedly molested when I was younger. The bee kept asking me, "But didn't this feel good? It felt good, right? Just admit it felt good," etc. Until I was a sobbing mess. When I told my mom, she refused to take me back. Thankfully. Told my former SIL, "It's better to be married with a family than be gay and alone." Then encouraged her to have another kid with my brother, who's a dude. She's gay. Spoiler alert. It didn't work out. Not sure why. Had to go to the hospital because I had cut myself about 4 years ago. I sat in the room where there are multiple different people and cases going on, so there wasn't any walls in between patients. And what does the head nurse do? We got to cut her to the holding room. You could see how uncomfortable the other nurses were, and even some policemen looking after someone else looked upset. She decided to yell it to everyone. Made me feel like complete garbage on top of how I already felt at the time. You have a lot of perceptions of the situations you're in, and I think that one is true. Well, Mike, what about the other 200 perceptions I've mentioned since we met? Yeah, I feel that. I've dealt with a few who are just kinda cold and unnecessarily blunt and dismissive. Guess day after day of that kinda work must do that to you. But that's not really an excuse, honestly. All I said to him was I was diagnosed with ADHD as a kid, and he went on a full rant about how people make up issues just to get to drugs. I saw him twice after that and would cry after every session. I mean, it does happen, but holy crap, that is just not a thing you say to someone who you barely know. It's so accusatory. Sophomore year of nursing school, I told my counselor that I was getting really scared I was going to relapse into anorexia because of my perfectionism in school. If I got less than 93% on assignments, I felt that I didn't deserve to eat and would restrict. Her response Well, I really admire your hard work and I think it's admirable what high standards you hold yourself to. That dedication is going to help your future patients. I was also her last appointment of the day. She was behind her desk packing her things up to leave while she was talking to me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.